Okay, form handling. So form handling might be the most interesting topic among the topics we covered today. Okay. Oops, sorry. So here we're going to talk about the how form submission is being handled. It is in fact two-phase process in which the first phase, the form page gets displayed and user enters something, and then user will submit the form. So that is a second phase. We'll talk about the concept of command and form object. We'll talk about the concept of model attribute. We'll do perform validation. Here we're going to see how we can add our custom validation as well. Data binding. Data binding is basically binding whatever user has entered into the input form field into your domain object. And as part of the data binding, there will be type conversion. We'll talk about those things, and we'll see how we can add our own type converter. And then we're going to actually see form tags. Spring comes with JSP form tags, so we're going to actually some of those things, and we'll see how redirection and refreshing page kind of related in form submission handling. So let's talk about the how form submission is being handled. As I said, it is a two-phase process. So the first phase is basically a user will ask the form page to get displayed. So that is a get request. Okay, so it is handling. So your method will handle initial form display request, which is HTTP GET. And here you're going to actually do typically two things in your method. You're going to create and initialize a command object. That command object will be then used in displaying the form page. Okay. And then in phase 2, user will enter some data into the input form fields, meaning in that form page, and will perform submit. That is a post request. Okay. Now there are several things that are going to happen in phase 2. First, data binding and type conversion. So basically whatever data that is entered into the input form field will be bound to a domain object, and when they do that, they will perform type conversion. Everything from the user is initially a string type, right? And that need to be converted into some type in your domain object. Some of them might be converted into int type, some of them might be converted into long type, and things like that. And also validation. You want to make sure the validation is being performed. Here we are talking about server-side validation. Okay, so validation could happen on the client side, meaning by the browser, or JavaScript in the browser, or the validation could be happening on the server side. So here by validation, we are talking about server-side validation. By the way, this data binding and type conversion and validation happens before your method gets executed. Okay, so if everything is fine, you are going to perform business logic handling with the input data, and eventually you're going to redirect after that. Okay, so we are going to take a look at each of these in a bit more detail. So if you're not comfortable with what I just described in this page, don't worry about it. So this is phase 1. So here we have account controller. So in phase 1, this method, get create form method, will be used to create the command object. So in this case, we are going to create a command object called the account, and the value of the command object is in fact the account object itself. So you can see this is basically model attribute, right? And then we are returning a view. So this is a logical view, and what it means is that it's going to display account / create form.jsp page. Okay. All right. There is one question from Lati. Can we track on server what value was entered by the user in a form? Yeah. So, what you get back is basically so in your code you're gonna actually get the the form. So let me actually get back to your question later on in the second phase. So phase 1 is basically to handle initial form display request. Okay, so this is the create form.jsp page that gets displayed. Okay, so you can see this is the this is actually using Spring form tag. Okay, and model attribute account. So model attribute means that this is in fact a model attribute. So if you see here, this is model attribute that we have created, right? And then add to a model. So this model attribute called the account is going to be used here. Okay, and then we have a labels and input form field, and then path, basically representing the properties of this account object. Okay, so this is a phase 1, displaying initial form page. Now when the user has entered something into these fields, user will submit. Okay, so this is input type submit, user will submit, then it will be, yeah, so this is the when the submit is clicked, it will call, it will send the request to account URL. So that is what the action attribute is all about. Action attribute specify the URL that you're sending this form. It will be submitted to this URL, and the method is post, meaning it will use HTTP post. Okay, so this method in the initial phase, this is the get, right? Initial phase, initial page, initial phase, it will use HTTP get to get this page, and when the form is submitted, it's going to be post. So this is how your server application, I mean your controller, we have in fact the two method. One is for handling phase 1 page display, and the second method is to handle the form submission. Okay, so this is the method that handles the form submission. So here we use create method. Okay, and you can see this is handling post request. Okay, now in this case there are 4 things happen. As I said before, in the second phase, data binding and type conversion happens first, and then validations are also performed by Spring frameworks. So by the time your method is invoked here, these 2 things, 2.1 and 2.2, data binding and type conversion and validations are performed for you. Okay, so you might want to ask, what happens if there is in fact an error? Okay, that's why it also provides a binding result object. So you can check whether this binding result has any errors. You can call has errors method of this binding result. If there has been any problem in data binding and type conversion and validation, it should have errors. So in this case, we are going to actually display the create form page again, so that user can actually enter corrected values. Okay, now if there are no errors in data binding and type conversion and validation, then you can continue your business logic processing. In this case, we are going to just add new account into accounts array in memory. Okay, typically you're going to actually perform some more data persistence kind of things. Okay, and then eventually you are going to redirect. Okay, so here we redirecting to a particular user's page. So we display the newly created user's detailed data. Okay, and we'll see why this redirection is in fact important later on. Okay, so that is phase 2. So any questions on this phase 1 and phase 2 concept? Okay, so let me address the question from Lalit. Can we track? So let me forward the question first. Forwarding the question. The question is, can we track on server what value was entered in user form client? So basically, if you go to this code, if there is no errors, then this account object should reflect whatever user has entered, right? Now, if there has been some errors, then you can actually go through the has errors, and you can actually check each error, and each error should actually have some information about the data that was entered, if that's what you're interested. Does that make sense? Okay, all right, so let's do the lab exercise, simple form. Okay, so this is the form handling. So we are going to import MVC form simple Maven project. So let's see, I should have import the project. Okay, so I'm going to create a new Java working set. Just put in full MVC form. And here I want to import the project. Import Maven project. And I'm going to just use this guy and then form. Okay, so we're gonna import into this working set, and let's see, the simple form is the simplest possible the form submission project, and we're gonna actually run it. Okay, and when you run it, you're gonna actually see these 4 fields: name, balance, equity allocation, and renewal date. Okay. And then here you can add Sang Shin and submit query. You can see some of these fields are in fact preset. The reason is because a count object have these fields preset. Okay, let me see whether we have all this. Okay, so let's stop the previous running server, and I am going to run MVC form simple application. Run as and Java application. Okay. Okay, it's almost there. Okay, so it deployed the application. So I am going to go localhost 8080, and it should display the forms like this. So here I am going to enter my name, and then we can submit the query, and then it just display the person's detailed information. So that's what happens here. Okay. Now, if you actually go back here, basically you can see these fields. If I actually refresh the page, you can see these fields are set. Let me just refresh the page. Oh, so this is actually already set. That's why. Okay, yeah, because I filled it. Yep. So, so this is what happens. Okay. So if you take a look at the control flow, so we're gonna actually see how things work step by step. Okay. We have a account controller, and we also have an exception class, and we have a count object, account class. Okay, and then we have 3 views: create form.jsp, and we are using view2.jsp. This is a table format. This is non-table format. Okay, and we are using view2.jsp to display account information in table format. That's all. So this is explaining when the application is run with slash, right? It will be redirected to account because we have configured redirect view controller. So it gets redirected to account. Okay, so it will actually go to a controller and a method that can handle this account URL, right? So if you take a look at our controller, in fact, we have only a single controller, account controller, which handles account URL. So this is the one that will be used. Okay, and then here we have the first method is used to display the first page. So here it is display the page, form page. Again, this is HTTP GET. Okay, now this is again the same thing we have seen in the code. We create a brand new account object, and then we create the model attribute called account, and then we add that attribute to the model, and then we are going to return account create form. So we are going to take a look at account form JSP page. So that is basically, if you take a look at that page here, web-inf, views, account, and create form. This is the page. Okay. All right. So I'm going to actually use the presentation. This guy. Now, if you take a look at the account class, you can see, the name field is not set. However, balance field and equity allocation and new date, they are set already. That's the reason, we were able to see those three fields preset, because when we create the command object, so in this case, when we, create the account model attribute, we are using this new account object. So those three fields are pretty much set. Okay. All right. So that is that. So the view resolver configuration. So there are two different ways of configuring view resolver. One is actually, using the view resolver configuration in the configuration, like if you take a look at our initial sample applications in our configuration file, we were configuring internal resource view resolver using a bean like this. Okay. Another way of doing these things is you can specify those things inside application properties file. So in this case, so here, if you take a look at the under SRC main resources, that is the application properties file. So here you can specify that same information like this. Okay, so this is probably a bit more flexible because it's a matter of changing the properties file rather than changing code. Okay, and you can also specify some of the logging properties. Okay, all right, so that is that. And then we see create form.jsp page. Okay, so that's what gets displayed, right? And so this is the we are using Spring form tags. Okay, so we are using model attribute, and the name of the attribute is account. Okay, so if you type like account1, then it's not gonna work, right? Because it's depending on the fact that model attribute account is present, meaning that is created by the controller. And then you have a properties, name, balance, equity allocation, and renewal date, and things like that. Okay. Okay. Now moving forward. So that's that's the reason we're actually seeing this guy. Okay. So we're gonna do some experimentation. First, let's change the balance to, maybe instead of, so we're gonna actually go to the account class. So yeah, go to Java here, and this is the domain account. So we want to actually initialize to 1500 instead of 1000. Okay, so now let's save the change and stop the server, and let's actually run the application again. This time, when the page is displayed, we should see 1500 rather than 1000, right? Because that's the value that was initialized by account object. Okay, it's done. Now let's actually do this guy. Okay, you can see the balance is now 1500. Okay, all right, that's good. So that is the experimentation. In this case, we changed to 1001, and that gets reflected. Okay, and we run the application, and then you should be able to see the change. Okay. Now in create form.jsp page, instead of using model attribute, you can actually use a command name. So those are the two, the same thing. Okay. So this is representing, in a sense, command object. So Spring Guys allows you to use a command name attribute instead of the model attribute. So we can actually change that one to instead of model attribute is the command name. Command name, and it should work the same. All right. So stop it and run it. For this exercise, I'm going to actually change this one to 1600 instead of 1500, just to make sure that we are actually seeing the changes. Okay, so let's run the application again. Run as Java application and main application. Okay, and now we should put here. Okay, so I was looking for this main application, and that means that it's deployed. So I can click this guy, and it should say 1600, and things work as expected. All right, and submit query, and it should work. Okay, now let's see what happens. Suppose in the create form, so in create form here, I change command, but if I do account 1 or something like that, then it will not work because there is no model attribute whose name is account 1. In that case, you probably want to change your controller. So instead of account here, oops, yes, I'm looking at the controller. So here, account controller, you should actually set account 1 or something like that. And if you do change both, then it should work fine. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Okay, so that is in fact the for your own exercise as well. So yeah, so this is the that is the first phase, and the second phase is the study control flow form submission handling. So when the user enter the value and then submit query, okay, it will go to the account. So it will go to the URL of account. I'm sorry, this is action. Okay, and it will send it in the form in HTTP post, right? So it will go to /account URL. Okay. So when they submit it, it will go to /account URL and HTTP post, right? And so that's what I just talked about here. And so the request will be handled by another method that receive this guy. So so this is the one that handles HTTP post, right? Okay, and it's actually receiving that account object as account object. All right. And again, it will check whether there are any validation errors. If there are in fact validation errors, it will redisplay the create form. And if there is no validation or the binding or type conversion errors, then all it does is basically adding that account into account array. So we have accounts array here. I think it's a hash map here, concurrent hash map. And that's basically all we do. And then we are redirecting to account and then newly created items ID. So that is being handled by this guy. All right, so that is step 4. So account 1 request is handled by get view here. We are receiving ID as variable. And then basically we just check whether that account is present or not. If it is not present, then we're going to actually throw resource not found exception object. If it is found, which is the case, then we are going to basically create another model attribute whose name is, so this is the we are using implicit key name generation. Okay, again, this is not usually a good practice. You want to provide the actual key name. Okay, and then we are just returning account view 2, and account view 2 is basically JSP page in which we are displaying those account information in the form of table. Okay, so that's basically what's happening. And on 1.4 for your own exercise, so I think again, just change this name account model in the initial form page, and your job is to make sure that your job is to actually make other changes somewhere to make it work. Is that clear? All right, so I'm gonna give you guys about 12 minutes to do this exercise.